It's 6 p.m. here in Korea. Welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. Let's start with the headlines. South Korea's top nuclear envoy says the 5 parties involved in talks on North Korea's nuclear program are ready to engage in unconditional exploratory talks with Pyongyang as a way to gauge its intentions. Nearly 200 renowned historians from all over the world joined forces to urge Japan to apologize for its wartime sexual slavery system. The scholars sought to remind Japan that denying or trivializing these acts is unacceptable. President Park Geun-hye gets an update on her deregulation drive and develops plans to foster growth in a meeting with her ministers earlier today. We'll have the latest on her plans. A possible breakthrough in the deadlock over resuming denuclearization talks with North Korea, South Korea, and the United States have signaled that they are ready to hold a preliminary round of unconditional discussions with North Korea with an eye to resuming the long-stalled 6-party talks. Our Hyun-bin starts us off.
South Korea's top nuclear envoy says there are no preconditions to resuming talks with North Korea on its nuclear program in order to test the regime's commitment before resuming formal 6-party negotiations. Hwang Joon-kook made the remarks after wrapping up talks with his U.S. counterpart Sung Kim in Washington on Tuesday.
These talks would be aimed at judging Pyongyang's real intentions and finding out whether it will make a sincere commitment to denuclearize.
When asked whether the proposal had been conveyed to North Korea, Hwang said they had not received a direct response from Pyongyang. He did mention, however, that the North had responded in an indirect manner through its state media, which so far has been less than receptive to the idea. China has been pushing the idea of holding unconditional exploratory talks with North Korea for the past few years. Beijing thinks it could be a stepping stone to resuming the long-stalled 6-party talks on denuclearizing North Korea. Those talks, not held since late 2008, involved the 2 Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia. The exploratory talks meet both Pyongyang's demand for an unconditional resumption of talks and Washington's insistence for talks to resume only after North Korea takes concrete measures to denuclearize. Looking to coordinate their 2 approaches, the South Korean envoy arrived in Beijing on Wednesday to hold talks with his Chinese counterpart, Wu Dao-wei. Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Flying around the world is part of the job for most world leaders, but this isn't the case for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, who hasn't left the country since coming to power in 2011. A U.S.-based expert on North Korea says Kim's decision to scrap plans to visit Russia this month shows the young leader is not confident enough to leave town for a day or two as he's yet to cement his grip on power. Our Connie Kim has this report.
Concern over his ability to exercise control over the North Korean regime may have been the reason behind Kim Jong-un's decision to cancel his planned trip to Russia this weekend. This is the view of Van Jackson, a North Korea expert at the Center for a New American Security. He made the remarks during a discussion held at Johns Hopkins University in Washington on Tuesday. Jackson said he never expected Kim to actually make the trip to Moscow, as the young leader feels insecure of his position. He said that if Kim was entirely comfortable with his grip on power, he wouldn't have executed senior officials and he would feel able to leave North Korea to attend events in other countries. Russia had repeatedly said Kim had confirmed his attendance to the May 9th event, which will mark the 70th anniversary of the Soviet Union's defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II. It was only last week that a spokesperson for the Kremlin said Kim had decided to stay in Pyongyang because of internal affairs. The U.S. expert also expressed concern over North Korea's massive stockpile of ballistic missiles, saying South Korea's current missile defense systems are not strong enough to cope with the threat. Jackson said deploying the U.S. missile defense system, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, otherwise known as THAAD, would go a long way to nullify the threat posed by Pyongyang's ballistic missiles. China has raised strong objections to the possible deployment of THAAD to the Korean peninsula, saying it could also be used to monitor mainland China. Jackson rejected Beijing's concerns, saying THAAD's radar could only detect missiles coming into the Korean peninsula. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Let's come back to South Korea. The vote on a bill to overhaul the pension system for public servants has been delayed due to wrangling between the rival parties. Ruling Saenuri Party floor leader Yoo Seung-min says the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy could boycott the voting session, though it hasn't done so yet. The opposition has expressed its discontent with the ruling party for failing to stick to an agreement struck last weekend to vote on both the public servant pension bill and a bill on reforming the national pension system, which is a different government-run pension scheme for the general public. If the proposed public servant pension bill is passed, public servants will be required to pay more in premiums while they work, but will receive less in payouts after they retire. President Park Geun-hye led a ministers' meeting on her deregulation drive, the third of its kind, earlier today. Identifying regulatory reforms as a key component of her economic policies, she called for a greater effort to revamp Korea's regulatory system. We turn to our Choi Yu-sun for more.
President Park Geun-hye says the government is planning to focus on ensuring the public and businesses are satisfied with our deregulation drive.
우리가 규제에 묶여 있는 동안 다른 경쟁국들은 발빠르게 움직이고 있습니다. 이제 우리도 경제 회복과 청년 일자리 창출을 위해서 보다 과감한 규제 개혁에 나서야 하겠습니다.
The president took note of efforts to address the most pressing deregulatory tasks and better gauge the public's concerns. However, she also urged officials to tailor the proposed reforms to more effectively benefit the related parties and said Korea's regulatory system should be revised to meet global standards. She added that while alternatives to regulation should be considered, new regulations need to maximize the private sector's autonomy. This year, the government announced a series of new reform measures. For the first time in more than 40 years, the government will ease regulations on greenbelt management initially implemented to prevent urban overpopulation and to preserve the environment. The Land Ministry says it will allow the construction of facilities to manufacture and sell indigenous products on greenbelts to boost the income of area residents. Restrictions on restaurant and housing construction will also be eased. Officials say the deregulatory actions will focus on reducing inconveniences for residents while striking a balance between development and preserving the environment. In a move to catch up with advanced countries like the US and Japan, the Korean government will adjust regulations to permit test drives of driverless cars with the goal of commercializing them by 2020. The government also plans to offer greater support in the areas of infrastructure and technological development. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Seeking to foster growth engines through foreign direct investment, the economy-related ministries on Wednesday announced plans to lift regulations on foreign investment and enhance cooperation between government agencies to expedite the process. For details, we have our Song Ji-sun.
Korea is gaining recognition as an attractive investment destination. But even as more investors acknowledge Korea's importance, they also say there is plenty of room for improvement. According to a survey by the Korean Chamber of Commerce, more than half of the foreign investors surveyed said Korea has increased in significance, especially after it agreed on a free trade pact with China. However, they also said the investment environment is not any more favorable than before. That is why Seoul is working to remove regulations and open doors to more investment. With the new deregulation package, Seoul is seeking to attract $30 billion in investment by 2017, a marked increase from the $19 billion record set last year. Starting next month, and for the first 2 years since their founding in Korea, companies with foreign investment will no longer have to limit the number of foreign employees to less than 20% of the workforce. In addition, foreign startups seeking to register a business will soon face less paperwork. The lifting of other regulations will give foreign companies opportunities to develop medical cosmetics and own airport maintenance services. In addition to easing regulations for foreign investors, the government will work toward fostering new growth engines on the domestic front by supporting the convergence of industries like healthcare and financial technologies. As a first step, the related ministries will help startups expedite the process of turning their ideas into products. The latest set of deregulation moves is aimed at improving efficiency and creating a greater synergy effect among government ministries and agencies. To do that, the government plans to remove redundant processes and emphasize collaboration. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
The average Korean worker is bringing home wages that are well above the OECD average, and the after-tax amount puts Korea even higher in the group, meaning the tax burden in Korea is not as heavy as in other member countries. According to the OECD's latest taxing wages report, Korea had the 14th highest annual income before taxes last year at $46,664 among the 34 member nations, and that's well above the OECD average of $41,000. Korea fell between Japan and Sweden. Switzerland topped the list with over $66,000, followed by Luxembourg and Norway. Koreans' annual income after taxes is just over $40,000, bumping it up to 6th place in the rankings, behind Australia and the Netherlands. Korean shipbuilders won the largest amount of new orders last month, retaining the top spot for 3 straight months. According to London-based Clarkson Research Services, during the month of April, Korean shipbuilders won new orders totaling 533,000 compensated gross tons, a widely used indicator to measure the amount of work necessary to build a ship. The Korean shipbuilders were followed by shipbuilders from China and Japan by a wide margin during the same period. In particular, shipbuilders from China produced less than 300,000 compensated gross tons in April, their lowest monthly output in 6 years. Japan has stepped up its campaign to ensure that wartime facilities housing enslaved laborers during World War II are added to the UNESCO World Heritage List. Tokyo-based broadcaster TV Asahi reported Tuesday that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is sending handwritten appeal letters to countries able to vote on the 23 sites for which Japan is seeking recognition for. 7 of the sites are facilities where roughly 58,000 Koreans were forced into hard labor during Japan's colonial rule of Korea. Seoul has expressed strong opposition to the move, saying Japan's attempt to glorify the sites of historical aggression is clearly at odds with UNESCO's goal of honoring locations that have universal value for humanity. A senior Chinese political leader says he hopes Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will offer sincere apology for Japan's wartime past in time for the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. According to Japan's Kyodo News Agency, China's top legislator Zhang Dejiang told a group of Japanese lawmakers on Tuesday that Abe's statement to mark the war's end in August should include a full apology for Japan's wartime atrocities, including its sexual enslavement of women. In his address to the U.S. Congress last month, Abe acknowledged Japan had caused suffering in the region, but there was no new apology for the 200,000 women forced into sexual slavery by Japan during the war. Last month, during a TV interview, Abe said there was no need to repeat previous war apologies and that he opposed the basic thinking behind previous apologies. Nearly 200 scholars from around the world have released a joint statement to urge Japan to face up to its wartime atrocities. They say the country's attempts to whitewash history will only draw more international attention to the issue. Our Hwang Sung-hee has this report.
187 international historians are calling on Japan to apologize for its wartime sexual enslavement of women. In a joint statement on Wednesday, the scholars said it's simply unacceptable for Japan to deny or trivialize its actions. More than 200,000 women, mostly Korean, were forced to serve the Japanese military during Japan's colonial rule of Korea in the mid-1900s. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been facing heavy criticism for backtracking on Tokyo's past apologies to the victims, denying the government's involvement in the recruitment of the women. Just a week ago, Abe ignored calls from the international community and refused to apologize to the so-called comfort women in his U.S. Congress address. In his attempts to whitewash history, Abe has relied in part on a lack of concrete evidence. The scholars pointed out that important evidence also comes from the testimony of victims. Wednesday's joint appeal follows a similar statement issued by 20 U.S. scholars in February. Professor Alexis Dutton from University of Connecticut, who led the move, noted in an earlier interview that such denials will raise more international awareness about the issue.
Right? It's not going to silence people either inside Japan or anywhere in the world, because that's not how questioning, thinking, research works. everybody's going to want to know more.
With the statement also sent to the Japanese leader, the focus now is on whether Abe will offer anything more in his statement on the 70th anniversary of the war's end. But most doubt he will have a change of heart by August. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
The city of Seoul is planning to tear down the 87-year-old annex to the National Tech Service to remove a symbol of Japanese colonial rule. The building located near Namdaemun Market was built by the Japanese in 1937 to block the view of Toksugung Palace. The demolition is part of a series of 25 municipal projects being carried out to commemorate the 70th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japan. The annex has been empty since December when the National Tech Service moved to a new location in Sejong City. Once the building is gone, Seoul plans to fill the space with a public square. That's all we have for you at this hour. We do have more coming up at 10 p.m. Korea time, so do join us then. For now, thank you for watching.